All right, so I'm recording. Um, so I I decided I wanted to share this stuff because I'm doing these portraits for issue 4 of Nivadahmandi, and in there they go to the local museum downtown, and I wanted all. So I my thought process, because originally when I wrote this version of Nivadahmandi, I thought the best way to get this thing out of my brain was to write it as a novel, prose. And so in the part where they're going to the museum, it got very descriptive and very detailed. And what I wanted that part of the story to be, and what it is for the comic, is this is the portion where we sort of reveal the historical nature of this whole concept, the concept behind Nivadahmandi as a whole, which is that the clothes are magic. And this is the reason why you have these anthropomorphic animals, talking dogs, cats, birds, blah, 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 blah. You have these animals that speak because the clothes are magic. The clothes grant them sentience, right? And it was also that answer to the question, why can Goofy talk but Pluto doesn't? And it's because Goofy wears clothes. Pluto does not. So it was me playing around with this idea on a more historical level, because I'm sitting here and I'm looking at old black and white cartoons, and more so than ever in old black and white cartoons, like rubber hose animation era cartoons, you see these early characters, these animals, and these anthropomorphic animals, and they're walking around and they're talking to each other and everything, but they also do regular everyday things with regular animals. And so I was like, okay, well, what's up with that? What is that? And I mean, it sent me down the rabbit hole, and I was like, well, how can I play with that? How can I play with the idea of that in the story? And I came up with something. It's a little dark, but it also makes sense. It's like that very early on in what would be considered more contemporary civilization, or the direct path to contemporary civilization for the characters in Nivadahmandi. You have some animals that are able to produce zela strand, which is the threads that come out of them that they turn into the clothes. It's the magical stuff, and some that don't. And so they would be regular animals, just regular everyday animals. And so like I was playing around with a lot of that, and in the museum, and I wanted like the character of Alicia. She's never been to the museum. Like Duncan, he was at the museum as a kid. He field trips and things like that. Like I had taken field trips to the museum as a kid in elementary school, and I think in middle school, but several times as a kid in elementary school. But then, like, I wanted Alicia to sort of just be stunned by what she was seeing, where there are all these old portraits and, like early photography, and, people just sitting, portraiture, and they're sitting and they're posing and they're in their best clothes or whatever they have at the time. And they're sitting there and they're posing. Sometimes, it's candid photos. It's just like photos around town, because it was supposed to sort of show the historical evolution of the city in the story, Ultros. And so you see like these different periods of its evolution, its stages, and all of it is sort of peeking at, because there are also occasionally portraits like this one where it's a whole family and they're sitting and they're in their nice clothes, possibly their only articles of clothing, but the father here, he's holding a chicken, and the chicken is just a chicken. And there are bird folk in the world that are also chickens, but they can speak and they wear clothes and they can build houses and all sorts of stuff. And they honestly probably would never bat an eye at this guy owning chickens. They might own chickens. And that was one of the things that I wanted to add to the story. Alicia's looking at this and she's like, people owned other people like pets? And it just like, I wanted it to be this element that blows her mind, but kind of grosses her. It sort of grosses her out. She's a little, just like turned off by this aspect of their world, because in the world that she lives in contemporarily, this is not a thing. There are no more animals that don't produce Zelastrand. So everybody is sentient. And in their world, animals that you would consider pets would be, for us, insects. Except for them, they're larger in scale. Which was something that showed up in issue 3 of Nivadahmandi, where we see in a flashback that one of the characters, she has a pet scorpion. Or she had a pet scorpion. And it was huge. It's huge. It's like, I wanted it to be the size of like what I would imagine. It's like the size of a very large dog, like a German Shepherd or something. And that's how I was playing with this idea. And I was just kind of, I'm recording this simply because I'm like working on this image, and I was kind of tickled by, certain traits of these old character designs. And one of them was like this whole, like their faces and how they are, they have this same shape. They always put this little halo around their face where like the end of the fur is, this is where the fur stops, so that, you can see like a good chunk of the face, the muzzle and all that stuff, and where the eyes are. And it's just kind of interesting how I was just coloring, and I was thinking about how funny that is, that's a thing. And it shows up on regular animals too, non-sentient animals, where they have this break at the face. And it's so specific because they always end up with this little widow's peak. Growing up, I had a widow's peak. I don't have it anymore because I'm getting older, and probably around my late 20s. I don't know. You get the slight receding hairline, and the first thing to go was my widow's peak. Thankfully, that's it so far. My widow's peak is gone, and that's where it stopped. My receding hairline stopped there at just taking the widow's peak, which is fine because I got teased hardcore as a kid for having a widow's peak. I was called Eddie Munster quite a bit for having a widow's peak, and I kind of hate that. But I'm working on here. I'm going to bring this into frame. I'm actually working on quite a few of these. You can see that one. I'm in the. Oh, here. Let me save that right quick. Yeah, there. I'm going to save it. But I'm working on a few of them. But I don't know. They're gonna be inside of the. And see, we have a couple, and part of the. So here, yeah, and here's another one. And like you can look at the clothes. There's a lot of like people wearing overalls, and they have overalls with one strap, or like this guy, and he's got like his little vest on. He's got no pants, no shirt, but he's got a vest on. And he's got his hat. And he's got his shoes. Or, no, he's not even wearing shoes. Sometimes, a lot of them, I have them without shoes. Like these guys, they don't have shoes. This is one of the images specifically that was described in the novel version of Nivadahmandi, where a cat and a dog they're just hanging out by their truck. Maybe an ice truck. I don't know what kind of truck it is. But there are like two cats in the image. And one cat is like doing the thing that cats do where they rub up against you, and they're just, just being cats, just being cozy and cuddly. And she was really, really just bothered by this particular image. And part of the reason why I decided, the look for these images was because, interestingly enough, like in a lot of those old rubber hose animated cartoons, you get a lot of the characters are they wear really tattered clothing. And my thought process behind it, like there's a lot of tattered clothing, there's a lot of really shabby houses, and the streets are messy, like stuff falling down, falling apart, broken windows, boarded up windows, a lot of, and then on top of that, like a lot of stuff that's just going to slap together, like really slap together. And like I was going for a lot of that with this. And like I have the sign is spelled sort of slightly phonetically. It says grocery, and like the S is backwards. So my idea behind this was that historically I'm looking at, the timeline of animation. We're looking at over, just over 100 years worth of animation, right? And in that history, we have these talking animals in our reality, right? And in the very early on, it was very simplistic. It was very simplistic, innocent, and like you had a lot of that imagery going on, right? And my thought was, well, because we were, like these beings were very new to the whole process of creating clothing and stuff like that. They made basic, all they could produce were basic clothing, and they were very new to being very intelligent and building a society. And I mean, the truth of behind all of that in our reality, the truth was that a lot of it was making fun of impoverished communities. It was, yeah, and a lot of those impoverished communities were people of color, black and brown communities that they were actually making fun of. We know the whole, like a lot of the characters looking the way they do is based on minstrel shows and, the use of blackface and things like that. So there's, they were playing with that kind of stuff, not necessarily as innocently as they would lead you to believe, but in my case, it is far more innocent. It is a part of the evolution of these people, and how they came to be. And I don't know. I was having a lot of fun with it. I have like this is a pigeon portrait, a portrait of a pigeon with a camera. And my thought process was, because I found like these old photos, I did a lot of, like looking at photos, and I found all these old turn of the century photos from like the late 1800s, early 1900s, when photography was very new, and they were out photographing people in the cities, photographing in studios, photographing in rural areas. And there were these photos that were taken by pigeons. And I thought that was really interesting. Like they had pigeons rigged with these little tiny cameras. I don't know. I have to finish reading the article to find out how they worked. But they were just flying around, and the camera is taking pictures, and the pictures are really interesting. They're like really weird. But my thought process was, in this world, in the world of Nivadahmandi, a bunch of these pigeons were the actual photographers of a lot of the stuff that's in the museums. And so in this case, one of the pigeons took a picture of another pigeon. I wasn't completely sure if it was a self-portrait or not. I know that there was a lot of self-portraiture that happened in those days, but it was really hard to do that because you had to get the timer set and you had to run over and then pose and then hope that you got the photo. So my thought process was, it was one of the two things that happened. Either he took a photo of himself holding one of the types of cameras that they were using to take pictures, or he himself a picture was taken by like one of his fellow photographers, also a pigeon. And it just, I don't know, I was just having fun with it, and like playing with a couple of different, tropes with birds. Often they don't wear pants. So I have this pigeon guy, and he doesn't wear pants. He's got shoes. He also has a glove. I didn't want to leave that out because that was a part of like the historical, the real world historical attachment was that in a lot of those early rubber hose and black and white cartoons, a lot of the characters are wearing gloves. And so, the gloves were a part of the magic of the clothes being magic. And so in Nivadahmandi, if you look at a lot of the older images, you'll see a lot of the people posing and they're wearing gloves. And the gloves do signify very specific things in their world, but it didn't matter in this particular instance. It was about people taking pictures, of what was happening in their world as it was changing, being proud of the changing world. I really love this image. I can't wait to actually get into, like drawing it and coloring it, because she has her little egg. It's a little egg in a little bundle, and I just like I was just having a ball making little details like that. And I have like pictures like this where she's here and she's in front of a couple of bison, but she also has her gloves and she's wearing some of her best outfits. And there's some things that are signifying that there's in some of these images, because of course it's moving forward through their time period and sort of like paralleling our, like I said, turn of the century. It sort of parallels us in ways, but then it veers off in other ways. But with them, this, like you see where they gradually sort of hit that 1910s era, early 20s through, the 30s and stuff like that. And the clothing is changing. And I wanted to show that. I wanted to indicate that visually with the clothing and showing that like some of the clothing is changing. This one, I have like this caravan of cats, and they're just sort of in the middle of a, like a little rural, maybe a suburb. And they just travel around. And again, none of them have shoes. I didn't want them with shoes, but it's just like how many clothes you have, what kind of clothes you have, it's like a sign of wealth or poverty and things like that. And it's just little details that I was putting in, like they have these little articles of cloth that just hang, and they are relatives that have passed, and they take an article of their clothing and they hang it, and then they may use the rest of their past relatives' clothing to stitch up their clothing or their children's clothing or living members of their family's clothing. And it's you carry the memory of your relatives with you. You honor them by carrying them and their memory along with you. And it's just like there's a lot of little stuff that I'm going to put in the story as I go, but definitely wanted to sort of seed in a lot of these images. And I don't mind talking about it now. This was another one of the weird ones that Alicia looks at, where it's the image here says, and it's cut off on purpose, but I'll just say what it says. It says Wild Bear Circus. And I don't remember what this was supposed to say. Best show ever, I think is what it says. And it's two bears. They're bear guys, but they're very well-to-do. They're dressed. They have a full set of clothing. Hat. Well, not a full set of clothing because they're not wearing pants, but they have hats, jackets, shirts, ties, gloves, and shoes. And that means a lot. If they had pants on, then their status would be undeniable. As they're walking up and down the street, people would know, oh, these are very well-to-do businessmen. But they're still pretty well-to-do, and they actually run, or at least they're part of a circus that has wild bears. And I wanted that to sort of be there to be unsettling, the fact that they call these non-sentient bears wild bears, you know? And it's just in that I'm playing with just sort of ideas of some of the things that we as humans did to one another, in that there were circus acts that involved people of color and like indigenous people. And they treated them as spectacles. You know, they were bringing people from all over the world to places in the West and showing them off as if they were so weird and unnatural, and in many cases uncultured and savages. And you know, they perpetuated false ideas of these people and where they come from and what it was like to be them. And they treated them like animals. And it's kind of sad. A lot of it is documented in early photography. And so you can see a lot of it. You can find all those images on the internet. And so I'm looking at stuff like that over the last few years and thinking about stuff like that and injecting those concepts, those ideas, and those real world histories into the world of Nivadahmandi. Not to be a bummer, but to make the world have a varied and, you know, like a history, you know, that give its backstory some depth, and to also talk about the fact that, you know, like Mickey Mouse owns Pluto, a dog that doesn't talk, but he's best friends with Goofy, a dog who does talk. And it's just like, you know, I've seen a commercial. It was for bubble bath, I think, a children's bubble bath, and it's like a commercial from like the 40s or something. And it literally is advertising Pluto and Goofy bubble baths, right? And the commercial, it's animated, animated commercial, and it starts off with Goofy sitting in an armchair with Pluto at his feet. It is wild. And if you see it and you process that idea that they're both dogs. And so I'm just running with these concepts, you know, and they do, and it's just interesting because these creators inadvertently were creating something that can be talked about on a very human level if you want to. Most people don't seem to want to, but I want to. Yeah, so I mean, that's it. That's all. I just wanted to, you know, record something and I don't know, just talk about some of this weird stuff and just talk about Nivadahmandi. So yeah, thank you for watching and listening to me ramble, and see you in the next video. Bye.